My name is Greth. I am a senior diplomatic observer of the Vokhari Conclave, and I have been recording galactic history for, give or take, 114 of your Earth years. I have watched species tear each other apart over the color of their respective suns. I have watched wars begin because one emperor sneezed in the wrong direction during a treaty signing. I have catalogued 49 conflicts that started because someone, somewhere, could not stop talking when they absolutely should have. But I have never, not once in 114 years, watched a single human woman walk into a room containing 17 armed warlords, a fully charged orbital weapons platform hovering 60,000 kilometers overhead, and the collective diplomatic patience of 11 species stretched thinner than hydrogen film, and then just start talking. Casually, like she had wandered in to pick up a package. Her name was Lyra Voss. And I want to be very precise here, because precision matters when you are writing history. Lyra Voss did not walk into that room with a plan. I know this because I reviewed the security logs afterward. She walked in with a thermos of coffee, a datapad that had a cracked screen, and an expression on her face that said she had not slept in approximately 47 hours and was not particularly pleased about it. The war she stopped had been building for 3 years. The war she started without meaning to, without even knowing she had done it, would eventually involve 32 species, 2 dying stars, and 1 extraordinarily angry entity that we will get to in due time. But first, let us go back to the beginning. Let us go back to the room. Let us go back to the moment when everything, quite spectacularly, changed. The Dorraki sovereignty had been the dominant military power in the Velith arm of the galaxy for roughly 6 centuries. They were tall, gray-skinned, with 4 arms and a face arranged in a way that communicated aggression even when they were completely relaxed. Their warlord, Keth, stood at roughly 2.5 meters, wore armor that had been forged from the compressed hulls of 17 conquered warships, and had a voice that genuinely sounded like a mountain, deciding to complain about something. He had been fighting humans for 3 years because of a territorial dispute near the Senate corridor, a stretch of space that both the Dorraki sovereignty and the human colonial authority claimed was theirs. The Dorraki said they had mapped it first. The humans said they had settled it first. Neither side had any interest in being wrong because neither side had ever been wrong before, and both sides were deeply committed to this personal record. 3 years of fighting had produced 17 major engagements, 11,000 human casualties, roughly 23,000 Dorraki casualties, the destruction of 4 inhabited stations, and 1 peace summit that had collapsed so catastrophically that the mediating planet had actually passed a law making it illegal to mention the event in public. The Vokhari Conclave, which is to say my people, had been asked to host a second peace summit on neutral ground. I was assigned as the primary observer. My superior, Director Sulo, explained my role to me with her customary warmth. She said, and I am quoting her directly, "Sit there, Greth, watch, write it down, try not to make it worse." I said I would do my best. She said that was not reassuring. She was right. The summit was held aboard the Conclave Station Merith, which orbited a dead planet in a system with no strategic value to anyone. This was deliberate. The thinking was that if there was nothing worth fighting over nearby, the 2 sides might focus on talking instead of looking out the window and calculating angles of attack. This was, in hindsight, extremely optimistic thinking, but it was the thinking we had. The Dorraki delegation arrived first. Keth walked off his transport with 17 armed soldiers, 4 sub-commanders, and a personal herald whose sole job appeared to be walking 2 steps behind Keth and looking deeply unimpressed by everything. His name was Brox, and he was very good at his job. I saw him look at a small child once on the station concourse, a Vokhari child offering him a decorative leaf as a traditional greeting, and Brox looked at that leaf with the expression of someone being handed a personal insult. The human delegation arrived 4 hours later. I was there at the docking bay when the human shuttle came in, and I want you to understand something about my expectations at that moment. I had reviewed the files. The human colonial authority had sent us a full roster of their diplomatic team 3 weeks prior. It was an impressive list. Ambassador Don Fraile, 17 years of experience in interspecies negotiations. Deputy Director Cale Wint, former military attaché turned career diplomat. Dr. Rael Mons, the foremost human expert on Dorraki psychology and territorial behavior. 5 additional support staff, 2 security personnel, and a technical advisor. What actually walked off the shuttle was, let me count, 1 person. 1 single person. Lyra Voss stepped onto the docking bay floor, carrying her thermos and her cracked datapad, wearing a civilian-grade jacket over what appeared to be a slightly wrinkled collared shirt, and looked around the bay with the focused, competent gaze of someone trying to find the nearest available restroom. I approached her. This was my job. "Miss Voss," I said, in my most professional diplomatic voice, "welcome to Station Merith. We were expecting a full delegation." She looked at me with eyes the color of old amber and said, "There was a thing." She paused. "Several things, actually. The ambassador got food poisoning on the transit ship. Deputy Wint's clearance got pulled 3 hours before departure because someone in security made an administrative error, and they are still sorting that out. Dr. Muntz broke his wrist in the docking corridor, apparently slipped on something, and they took him to the medical wing. The rest of the team," she tilted her head. "I'm not actually authorized to tell you what happened to the rest of the team." I stared at her. "But here I am," she said pleasantly. "I'm the language and cultural liaison, technically the most junior person on the delegation." She paused again. "The current delegation of one." Another pause, that being me. "The Dorraki sovereignty is represented by Warlord Keth personally," I said. "He commands 43 warships currently positioned within 1 hour's transit of this station." "Okay," she said. "The orbital weapons platform overhead belongs to Keth as well, as a quote, precautionary measure." "Right," she said. 17 of the people in that room are warriors who have been in active combat within the last 6 months. "I noticed that," she said, with the casual tone of someone who had noticed the weather was slightly overcast. "Miss Voss," I said slowly, "perhaps we should contact the Colonial Authority and request a delay." She looked at me with an expression I would come to know very well over the next several hours. It was an expression that said she understood the rational argument being made, she had considered it, and she had decided to proceed anyway, not because she was reckless, but because she had already done the math in her head and come to a different conclusion than everyone else in the room. "They have been waiting 3 years," she said quietly. "People are dying every week this drags on. If I ask for a delay, Keth will read that as the humans blinking first, and then we will need another 6 months just to get back to where we are right now." She picked up her thermos and her datapad and started walking toward the summit chamber. "Let's go," she said. "Which hallway?" I pointed. I do not know why I pointed. She was clearly going to walk into that room regardless of what I did. I pointed because it was my job, and because, if I am being completely honest, I wanted to see what happened. The summit chamber was designed to feel neutral. That is to say, it was designed by Vokhari, who are deeply committed to the concept of neutrality, which means it looked exactly the way you would expect a committee of beings deeply committed to neutrality to design a room. Everything was gray. The table was gray. The walls were gray. The light was a careful, even, totally non-provocative gray-white that made everyone in the room look slightly unwell. There were no windows. There were no decorative elements of any kind, because any decoration might accidentally favor one cultural tradition over another. There was a small bowl of plain water on the table, which was the Vokhari traditional gesture of hospitality and which every non-Vokhari species found deeply underwhelming. Keth was already seated at the far end of the table. He took up approximately the space that 3 human-sized chairs would normally cover, and his forearms were folded in the Dorraki posture that every expert on Dorraki psychology described as pre-confrontational resting stance. Brock stood behind him, looking disappointed by the existence of the room. The 17 warriors lined the wall behind Keth like a very well-armed tapestry. Lyra Voss walked in, set her thermos and datapad on the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down. Keth looked at her. He looked at the door behind her. He looked at her again. "Where is the human delegation?" he asked. His translator rendered his voice as that mountain complaint sound I mentioned earlier. Deep, resonant, and somehow personally offended by the air around it. "This is the human delegation," Lyra said. Keth stared at her for a very long time. I was standing near the door in my observer capacity, writing notes, and I noted his expression carefully. It cycled through several distinct phases. First, mild confusion. Then, deeper confusion. Then, something approaching offense. Then, a kind of grudging recalibration. "You are a junior liaison officer," Keth said. He had clearly done his research. He had the manifest too. "Cultural and language liaison, yes," Lyra said. "But I'm here, and I'm authorized to speak, and I'm ready to talk if you are. You are not an ambassador." "I'm not. No, you have no military rank." "I really don't. You carry no visible weapons." He paused. "You are carrying a beverage container." "I am," she said. "It's coffee. Would you like some?" I wrote the word coffee in my notes and underlined it. Not because I thought it was relevant. I underlined it because the question was asked with such complete sincerity, such total absence of irony or strategy, that it took everyone in the room a moment to process it. Keth's forearms shifted slightly, and his expression did something I had never seen a Dorraki expression do in my entire career. It became uncertain. "No," he said, after a pause. "That's fair," she said. "It's been sitting for a while anyway." There was a silence. A very specific kind of silence. The kind that you get when a room full of beings who were prepared for something have just been confronted with something else entirely and need a moment to reorganize. Keth leaned forward. He did this slowly, deliberately, in a way that was clearly meant to be intimidating. In fairness to him, it was effective. He was very large, and he was leaning a very significant distance toward a single undefended human woman who had no armor and no weapons, and approximately 2 ounces of cold coffee in a thermos. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. "Warlord Keth of the Dorraki sovereignty," she said immediately, without checking her notes, looking him directly in his 4 eyes. "You united the Dorraki outer clans under one banner 31 years ago. Before that, those clans had been fighting each other for 2 centuries. You did it through 9 individual challenges, each one against the ruling warlord of a different clan, and you won all 9. The 9th challenge was against your own uncle, which, based on everything I have read about Dorraki family dynamics, must have been an enormously complicated situation." Another pause. Longer this time. "You know of this," Keth said, and it was not a question exactly. It was the tone of someone who had mentioned a specific personal thing and found, unexpectedly, that the other person already knew it. "I have done my reading," she said. "Your uncle's name was Greth. He was the warlord of the Kessin clan. He challenged you first, actually, not the other way around. The records we have say you didn't want to fight him." She looked at Keth steadily, "But he gave you no choice." The room was very quiet. Brox, standing behind Keth, had stopped doing his professional expression of total disdain. He was now doing something closer to careful attention. "I noted this." "Why do you know this?" Keth asked. "Because you are the most important person in the room," she said simply, "and I find that if you are going to talk to someone important, you should probably know who they actually are, not just who they are on paper." I wrote that sentence down word for word, not because it was strategically brilliant, though it was, not because it was perfectly crafted, though it was that too. I wrote it down because it had the specific quality that I have observed in only a very small number of genuinely skilled communicators across my 114 years of observation. It was completely, unmistakably true, and the person it was said to could feel that it was true. There is no more disarming thing in the universe, I have found, than sincerity delivered with perfect aim. Keth sat back slowly. He did not unfold his arms, but the pre-confrontational posture shifted just slightly into something with less forward lean. "The colonial authority sent a junior liaison," he said, "because they do not take this negotiation seriously." "The colonial authority," Lyra said, "sent whoever was standing at the dock when the shuttle left, which happened to be me." She picked up her datapad, cracked screen and all. "I take it seriously. I'm here, aren't I?" "You are here," Keth said, "because you had no choice." "We always have a choice," she said. "I chose to stay when I could have gone back with the others." She set the datapad down flat on the table. "I want to talk about the Sen corridor. Not the legal arguments, I'm sure you have both memorized those as well as I have, and frankly neither argument is going to get either of us anywhere we haven't already been. I want to talk about why the Sen corridor matters to the Dorraki sovereignty specifically, not what it's worth strategically. Why it matters, is that something you are willing to talk about?" There was a long beat. Keth's 4 eyes tracked her slowly, the way a very experienced predator tracks something that is not behaving the way prey normally behaves and has not yet decided whether this is concerning or interesting. "You think you can understand Dorraki interests?" he asked. "I think I can try," she said. "I think trying is the whole point. I should explain, at this juncture, what made this remarkable. Because you might be reading this and thinking, well, it sounds like a conversation. A tense conversation, certainly, but not some universe-altering event. People have tense conversations. People try to understand each other. It happens. What does not happen, what I had genuinely never seen happen in 36 formal diplomatic sessions involving Dorraki representatives, is that a Dorraki warlord answers the question. They do not do that. The Dorraki are not built for it. Their entire cultural framework around conflict resolution is adversarial. You state your position. Your opponent states theirs. You find the strongest position and you hold it. You do not explain why it matters to you, because explaining why something matters is, in Dorraki culture, the same as showing which part of you can be hurt. It is an act of significant vulnerability, and vulnerability in Dorraki tradition is offered only to those who have earned the right to see it. Keth answered her anyway. I do not fully understand why, even now. My best theory is this. Lyra Voss had walked into a room where everyone expected her to either be afraid or to perform strength. She did neither. She sat down, offered cold coffee, and asked a genuine question, and something in Keth, after 31 years of political armor and tactical posturing, encountered something he did not have a pre-prepared response to. He talked for 40 minutes. He talked about the Sene corridor in a way that was not about kilometers of space or transit routes or strategic positioning. He talked about it as the route his people had used for 200 years to reach the Reth Nebula during their passage ceremony, a spiritual tradition marking a young Dorraki warrior's first journey into battle. The human colonial settlements had blocked the traditional path. Not intentionally. There was no evidence of intentional blockading, but the effect was the same. The passage ceremony required the specific sightline from the corridor to the nebula, a sightline now disrupted by 3 orbital stations and 1 very large communications relay. These are not warriors you fight, Keth said. These are settlers, civilians. They did not plan to block our path, but the path is blocked. And if I do not address this, I am a warlord who allowed our sacred tradition to be ended by the placement of a communications array. He made a sound that his translator rendered as something between a laugh and a growl. Do you understand how that sounds? I understand exactly how it sounds, Lyra said, and I want to tell you something about those 3 orbital stations. She pulled up her data pad. 2 of them are commercial relay stations, private contracts, not government-operated. The third one is a colonial authority science platform studying dust distribution in the corridor. None of them are inhabited permanently. The relay stations have maintenance crews of 3 people each on rotating schedules. The science platform has a staff of 9. She looked at him. None of them are load-bearing structures for the colonial authority's infrastructure in the region. They can be moved. The question is whether the colonial authority would agree to move them. Keth looked at her. And would they? He asked. I don't know yet, she said honestly. I'm a junior liaison with a cracked data pad and about 4 hours of sleep. But I know that no one on our side has ever asked the question, because no one on our side knew the passage ceremony was the reason this mattered. And no one knew that because this is the first time anyone on your side has said it. She set the datapad down. So now we both know something we didn't know an hour ago. That seems like progress. The silence that followed was different from the earlier silences. It was not the silence of a room holding its breath waiting for violence. It was the silence of a room where something had shifted. Quietly and irrevocably, the way a room shifts when someone opens a window in winter and then closes it again. The temperature does not go back to exactly what it was. Brox, behind Keth, was now doing an expression I had never seen on a Dorraki herald's face in my life. He was doing something that, if I had to name it, I would call cautious hope. A deeply uncomfortable expression for him, clearly. He looked like a man wearing shoes on the wrong feet. Technically functional, deeply unsatisfying. Keth uncrossed all 4 of his arms. This may sound like a small thing. It is not a small thing. In Dorraki body language, a warlord uncrossing all 4 arms during a formal meeting is the equivalent of removing armor. It is done only when the warlord has decided the person across from them is not, currently, an adversary. What is your name? Keth asked. Lyra, she said. Lyra Voss. You are young, he said. For a human, I suppose, she said, compared to you enormously. Something happened to Keth's face. I have reviewed the summit recording 41 times since that day, and I am still not entirely certain how to classify it. The translator described the sound Keth made as low vocalization, tone indeterminate. I believe what Keth did was laugh. Not loudly, not openly. The way someone laughs when they have been surprised into it and their dignity has not fully processed the event yet. You are not what I expected, he said. I get that a lot, she said. And that was, more or less, how Lyra Voss stopped a war. It did not end there, of course. There were 6 more hours of discussion. There were legal arguments and territorial specifications and an extended sidebar about the exact orbital positioning of the communications relay that I found deeply technical and moderately soporific. There was a moment, around hour 4, where Sub-Commander Paxson said something provocative about human territorial mapping methodology, and one of Keth's warriors behind him reached for a weapon, and Lyra said, very calmly, without looking up from her datapad, that would be a poor choice, in fluent Dorraki military dialect, which she had apparently learned to a conversational level without telling anyone. and the warrior stopped moving, and Paxson turned the color of cooling lava, and Keth's laugh that time was not subtle at all. By the end of the evening there was a provisional framework, a temporary ceasefire, an agreement in principle to address the orbital stations, a technical committee to be formed, an actual committee with actual members set to meet within 60 days. It was not a peace treaty, it was an agreement to keep talking, but an agreement to keep talking is, I have learned, more valuable than almost any other document in the universe. Wars end when people agree to keep talking. They persist when people decide they already know everything they need to know, and talking is therefore unnecessary. I filed my observer's report that night. I wrote 3,000 words on the session and then added, at the bottom, a personal note that I knew Director Sulo would read and likely delete. I wrote, I believe Miss Lyra Voss may be the most naturally talented communicator I have observed in my career. Recommend the colonial authorities send her to every difficult engagement going forward. I meant this as a compliment. I meant it entirely positively. I want that noted for the record. I did not know, writing those words, that the colonial authority would read my report with tremendous enthusiasm and that their interpretation of send her to every difficult engagement going forward would be quite this literal. I did not know that within 14 months, Lyra Voss would be classified as a Level 5 diplomatic asset, which meant she was dispatched to any situation the colonial authority deemed officially unresolvable by normal means. I did not know that she would, in that capacity, successfully mediate 4 additional conflicts in the following 18 months. I did not know that word would spread, that her name would travel along the diplomatic channels of 11 species, with the particular velocity that names acquire when they are attached to genuine, undeniable competence. I did not know that her name would eventually reach the Conclave of the Undying, which is a name that tells you everything you need to know about the beings who chose it. And I did not know that the Conclave of the Undying would react to hearing her name the way they reacted to everything they found interesting, which is to say immediately, and with the full weight of their considerable, terrifying, and genuinely incomprehensible attention. I know all of this now. I am writing this now, 2 years after that summit, aboard a colonial authority vessel that is moving very quickly in a direction I am not entirely comfortable with, next to Lyra Voss, who is drinking coffee from a new thermos because her old one got lost during the evacuation of Station Merith 4 days ago. You look worried, she said to me, approximately 20 minutes ago, glancing up from her datapad. I am quite worried, I told her. You are always worried, she said. I was not always worried, I said. I began being always worried approximately 11 days ago, which was when I was informed that the Conclave of the Undying has identified you as a threat to galactic stability and has dispatched an arbiter to deal with you specifically. I know, she said. You know, I said. I have read the same reports you have, she said. I'm on the distribution list, Lyra, I said, and I want it recorded that I used her first name because I do not typically do that. I used it because the situation warranted it. The Arbiters of the Undying have ended 17 civilizations. They are not diplomats, they are not soldiers. They are something for which our languages do not have a fully adequate word. An arbiter does not negotiate. An arbiter does not give warnings. An arbiter arrives, makes an assessment, and acts. She nodded slowly. She had been nodding that way since I started talking, the nod of someone who is listening while simultaneously thinking about something else. I know all that, she said. Then you understand, I said, why I am worried. I understand why you are worried, she agreed. But here's the thing, Greth. She looked at me, those amber eyes steady and calm in the way that I had come to understand meant she had already done the math and arrived somewhere I had not been yet. Every time someone has been told I'm not qualified to handle something, every time someone has said the other side won't listen, every time someone has said this particular problem is beyond what one person with no weapons and a cracked datapad can do, she smiled. It was a small smile, very quiet, the kind of smile that contains a great deal of history. I went anyway, she said. I looked at her for a long moment. The Arbiter, I said carefully, is not Warlord Keth. No, she agreed. It is not a creature that laughs at unexpected jokes or uncrosses its arms to indicate goodwill. Probably not. No. It does not drink coffee or have a complicated relationship with its deceased uncle. I would assume not. It has, I said, because I felt this needed to be said clearly. No known psychology. Our records on the Undying span 6,000 years and we do not know what they want, what they value, what they fear, or what they consider an acceptable outcome. They are 6,000 years old. Lyra, some of them possibly older. We do not have a framework for understanding them. She was quiet for a moment. 6,000 years, she said. At minimum. She nodded again, slowly, the way she nodded when something was going into the active part of her thinking, rather than the storage part. That means they have seen everything, she said. Every war, every peace, every empire that rose and fell. 6,000 years of watching species fight and talk and fight again. She picked up her datapad. I wonder what that does to someone. How lonely that must be. I stared at her. She was looking at her datapad, pulling up files on the Conclave of the Undying, and she was looking at them the way she had looked at the files on Keth's 9th challenge. The way she looked at things she found genuinely, personally interesting. The way she looked at people. You are going to try to talk to it, I said. That's my job, she said. Your job, I said, was language and cultural liaison on a diplomatic team of 9 people, and you were the most junior member. Well, she said, and took a sip of her coffee, the team keeps getting smaller. I wrote that down. I write everything down. It is my job. And somewhere in the back of my 114-year-old mind, alongside the very reasonable fear that we were all moving very quickly towards something catastrophic, there was a small, deeply inconvenient feeling that felt a great deal like wanting to see what happened next. Because I had been there in that gray room when Lyra Voss offered cold coffee to a warlord and it worked. And I had been there for all 4 of the engagements that followed, watching her do things that no file or framework or expert assessment could predict, because she was not following a framework. She was following something older and stranger and considerably more difficult to account for, which was the genuine belief that anyone, regardless of how alien, regardless of how ancient, regardless of how many warships or weapons platforms or centuries of armor they carried, was still someone who could be talked to. Whether she was right about the Arbiter, I did not know. Whether the Arbiter had any interest in being talked to, I did not know. Whether this ship was moving fast enough, I very seriously doubted. But the coffee was apparently still warm, and Lyra Voss was reading, and the stars outside the viewport were very bright and very cold and very far apart. And somewhere ahead of us, something 6,000 years old was already moving in our direction. Let me tell you about the Conclave of the Undying, because if you are going to understand what happened next, you need to understand what we were dealing with, and I mean that in the most literal, least metaphorical way possible. You need to understand it, because we did not, and that gap in understanding very nearly ended 11 civilizations simultaneously. The Undying are old. I said 6,000 years in the last entry, and I want to revisit that number, because writing it down and genuinely comprehending it are 2 different things entirely. 6,000 years ago, humanity was building in mud and stone near riverbanks on a single planet. The Vokhari were still in our pre-space era, worshipping the twin moons with elaborate ceremonies and absolutely no idea how enormous the universe was. The Dorraki had not yet unified. Most of the species currently represented in the Conclave did not yet exist in any form that would recognize itself. The Undying were already old then. They do not have a homeworld anymore. It is gone. Not conquered, not abandoned. Gone. Whatever happened to it occurred so long ago that even their own records treat it as something close to mythology. They travel in sanctums, which is what we call their vessels, though vessel implies a level of mechanical construction that is perhaps not accurate. A sanctum is large. The largest one we have on record is approximately the size of a small moon, and it moves without any propulsion signature we can detect, which means either they have physics we do not, or they have simply decided that physics applies differently to them, and the physics agreed. There are believed to be 9 Undying, possibly fewer now, possibly the same 9 for 6,000 years. We genuinely do not know if that is possible, or what that would even mean for a being to experience. 9 entities, ancient beyond any useful framework, traveling the galaxy in their moon-sized sanctums, and their governing body, such as it is the Conclave. The Conclave does not make laws, it makes judgments. When the Conclave decides that a developing situation in the galaxy represents a threat to what they call the continuance, which appears to mean something like the ongoing survival and balance of sapient life in general, they send an arbiter. The arbiter evaluates. The arbiter acts. In 6,000 years of recorded history, no arbiter has ever been argued with successfully. Several species have tried. The results are documented. They are not documented in great detail, because when documentation is produced by the survivors and there are not very many survivors, you tend to get incomplete records. Lyra Voss had been flagged as a threat to the continuance because of what she had done over the previous 18 months, not because of the ceasefires she had negotiated, not because of the lives she had saved. She had been flagged because the Conclave had looked at the pattern of her work and arrived at a conclusion that was, I will admit, entirely logical if you accepted their premises. Their reasoning, as transmitted to the colonial authority in a message that arrived without any identifiable source and registered on our systems as having already been there when we checked, was as follows. Every conflict Lyra Voss had resolved in favor of humans. Not because she was dishonest, not because she cheated or manipulated, but because human interests, in each case, turned out to be compatible with the reasonable interests of the other party once those interests were properly articulated. In every engagement, Lyra found the common ground. In every engagement, the common ground turned out to include something humans wanted or had. The Conclave's concern was not Lyra Voss specifically. The Conclave's concern was the pattern. One species, the Conclave noted, that is consistently present at every moment of mutual understanding, consistently benefits from every resolution, and consistently expands its presence and influence as a result, is not a species participating in galactic balance. It is a species accruing advantage through the machinery of diplomacy, while everyone smiles and shakes hands and calls it peace. They were not wrong. This is the thing I keep coming back to, 2 years later, sitting at my desk, writing this account. The Conclave was not wrong. The mathematics of the situation, viewed from 6,000 feet and 6,000 years, looked exactly like what they described. A young species, astonishingly good at talking to everyone, astonishingly good at finding common ground, and astonishingly present at every significant moment of interspecies resolution in a sector that happened to border human space. The Conclave sent an arbiter to end the pattern. Its name, as best as our translation could render it, was Vael. We knew Vael was coming because the colonial authority received a second message 9 days after the first one. This message said simply, "An arbiter approaches. It will make contact within 14 of your days. Cooperation is advisable." The message was signed with a symbol our systems registered as belonging to the Conclave, and then the symbol did something our systems genuinely could not parse, which the technical team described as the symbol changed while we were reading it and then stopped being a symbol and became something else, and we don't know what the something else is. We had 14 days. Lyra spent 3 of them reading every recorded account of arbiter contacts we had. All 47 of them. She read the ones that ended in civilizational collapse, with the same careful expression she had read Keth's personnel file. She asked questions. She wrote notes on that cracked data pad, filling pages I occasionally glimpsed over her shoulder. I could not read most of it because she wrote very small and somewhat sideways when she was thinking hard, which I found both humanly specific and deeply interesting. On day 4, she came to find me in my observation room. I was reviewing my own files and trying very hard not to think about the fact that a being the size of a moon was somewhere in space moving toward us with the stated intention of ending something. "Greth," she said from the doorway. "Lyra," I said. "What do we know about what the Undying actually are?" she asked. "Not what they do, what they are." "Biologically?" "In any way," she said. "What are they? What were they?" I turned in my chair to face her. "We know very little. We know they were once biological. We know they underwent a transition, the nature of which is unclear, somewhere in their ancient history. There are records suggesting the transition was voluntary. There are other records suggesting it was necessary. There are records suggesting it was both." I paused. The most consistent account across all 6,000 years of contact is that the Undying experience time differently than any other sapient species. They do not perceive the present the way we do. They perceive it as one point in a very long line. Everything is simultaneous to them to some degree, past, present, and certain elements of what we would call future. Lyra was nodding. That particular nod. "So when they look at me," she said slowly, "they don't just see Lyra Voss. They see every version of every moment of every consequence. That is the theory, yes." "That must be exhausting," she said. "I suspect they are past exhaustion," I said. "I suspect they miss the present tense," she said. I looked at her. "That is an unusually specific speculation." 6,000 years, she said. "Every moment you have ever lived still happening. Every conversation you have ever had still being had. Everyone you have ever cared about still alive and also gone and also never born yet, all at once." She was quiet for a moment. "That's not a life. That's a condition." She looked at me. "When was the last time an arbiter was sent to something that wasn't a threat to be neutralized?" I pulled up my files. I went through all 47 records. "There is one account," I said slowly, "of an arbiter making contact with a species voluntarily, without being sent, approximately 2,000 years ago. The species was called the Veth. They were on the edge of extinction due to a biological collapse in their population. The Arbiter arrived, provided information that allowed the Veth to stabilize their genetic diversity, and left. I looked up. The Veth records described the Arbiter as appearing, quote, grief-stricken. They had never seen an Undying express visible emotion before. They didn't know what to make of it. Grief-stricken, Lyra repeated. It is one account, I said, 2,000 years old. But it's real, she said. Something moved one of them enough to go help, voluntarily, without orders. Yes. She was quiet again. I watched her face, and I could see the thing happening that happened when she was building something. Not a strategy exactly, more like a shape, a way of understanding a situation that nobody else in the room had found yet. I need to know everything about the Veth contact, she said, which Arbiter it was, which sanctum, everything the Veth recorded about what was said. Lyra, I said carefully, the Arbiter coming for us is here to neutralize a pattern of human expansion. It is not coming to help. The emotional state of an Arbiter 2,000 years ago during a completely different kind of contact is the only time we have a record of one of them doing something because it wanted to, she said. Not because it was sent, because it chose to. She looked at me steadily. That means something. I pulled the Veth files. The Arbiter arrived on day 11, 3 days early, which was either because their sense of our time measurement was imprecise or because they did not feel bound by the schedule they had communicated and wanted us to know that. I leaned toward the second interpretation. Vael did not arrive in a sanctum. It arrived alone, which I had never read about in any account, which I found so far outside my framework that I spent approximately 20 minutes simply verifying that my instruments were working correctly. It arrived as something my sensors registered as a field of organized energy, roughly 2 meters in height, roughly bipedal in shape, though the shape was not fixed. It shifted, not dramatically, not in a way that suggested instability, more the way a fire shifts, constantly moving within a defined form, never the same twice, never not itself. It appeared without any transit signature in the center of the Colonial Authority ship's primary conference room. The security team reacted immediately. This was predictable and reasonable and completely irrelevant, because Vael looked at the 4 armed officers who raised weapons in its direction, and the weapons simply stopped working. Not dramatically, not in an explosion, they just stopped. The power cells read empty. The mechanisms did not engage. The officers were unharmed. The weapons were simply no longer weapons. They were now small, expensive, inert objects. Lyra, I said over the comm, the Arbiter is in conference room A. I know, she said. I'm already here. She was already there. She was sitting at the conference table, datapad in front of her, coffee to her right, and she had apparently been sitting there for the past 20 minutes because she had read the Veth accounts 3 times and decided that an Arbiter announcing arrival 3 days early probably meant it was already close enough to observe the ship, and if it was observing the ship, it might appreciate being met somewhere prepared rather than somewhere surprised. This was in retrospect an extraordinary piece of reasoning delivered from a place of almost complete informational uncertainty. The Arbiter, Vael, turned toward her. It looked at her for what my instruments later told me was 4 minutes and 37 seconds, though in the room it felt considerably longer. I was watching through the observation window, and I can tell you that looking at Vael, looking at Lyra was one of the most uncomfortable experiences of my career. There was an intelligence in that attention that was not human, and not Dorraki and not Vokhari. It was ancient and precise, and it was looking at her the way you look at something you have seen before, something whose ending you already know, and the knowledge is not comfortable. Lyra Voss, said Vael. Its voice was not a voice in the conventional sense. It registered on our audio equipment as sound, but it also registered as something else, something my instruments flagged as unknown signal type, and then helpfully stopped flagging because the instruments themselves seemed to become uncertain. It was a voice that implied that many other frequencies were present and simply choosing not to be heard at this moment. Vael, said Lyra. You know my name, it said. I have been doing my reading, she said. If I live to 214, which seems increasingly unlikely, I will still remember the moment that followed. Because Vael, this being of energy and ancient intelligence and 6,000 years of unbroken existence went still. Not physically still, it was always somewhat in motion. Still in the way that a room goes still when something unexpected has just happened and every presence in the room needs a moment to process it. You said my name, Vael said. I did, she said. No one says my name, it said, not as a statement of power, not as a correction, as a fact. The way you state a fact that you have not thought about in a very long time, and saying it out loud makes it strange. I know, she said. I read the records. In 47 contact events, in 6,000 years, not one species that encountered an Arbiter used its name. They called you Arbiter, or the voice of the Undying, or the End, or several other things I won't repeat, because some of them are fairly rude. She picked up her coffee. Your name is Vael. You have had it for 6,000 years. It seemed right to use it. The conference room was very quiet. My own breathing sounded very loud to me. You are aware of why I am here, Vael said. I am, she said. You are here because the Conclave has identified a pattern of human diplomatic influence that, extrapolated forward, suggests a trajectory of human expansion that would destabilize the current balance of power in this sector within 400 to 600 years. She set the coffee down. I have read the Conclave's assessment. It's thorough. The mathematics are sound. Then you understand, Vael said, that I am here to end the pattern. I understand that's the task, she said. I want to talk about whether it's the right one. Another silence. This one longer. No one has ever suggested, Vael said slowly, as though testing each word carefully, that my task was not the right one. I'm not saying you are wrong about the math, she said. I'm saying the math answers a question no one checked was the right question. She turned her datapad toward the space where Vael floated. Though whether Vael needed to read a datapad to access information it contained was unclear. The question the Conclave answered was, will human diplomatic influence cause an imbalance of power? And the answer is yes, probably, within a few centuries. But the question they didn't ask was, would removing that influence produce balance? Or would it just produce a different kind of imbalance, one with more violence and less resolution? Vael was still attending. I have been counting, she said, and she sounded like herself now, like the person I had watched in that gray room offering cold coffee to a warlord, calm and direct and completely certain of what she was saying, even in the presence of something that could disassemble the ship around her without visible effort. In the 18 months since my first engagement at the Senate corridor, there have been 11 other conflicts in this sector that were heading toward active violence. 8 of them were resolved through negotiation. 3 of them collapsed and became active fighting. And I looked at those 3. I looked at them very carefully. She was quiet for a beat, long enough to make Vael lean slightly forward, and I marked that in my notes because the forward lean of an ancient being made of energy is not nothing. All 3 of the ones that became wars, she said, were ones I wasn't involved in, not because I chose not to be, because the colonial authority sent someone else, someone more senior, more qualified, more experienced than a junior language liaison with a cracked screen and questionable coffee habits. She did not smile when she said this, though I could hear the small, restrained shape of one in her voice. The 8 that resolved. I was there for 5 of them. The other 3 resolved because the parties involved were using frameworks and communication approaches that came out of the Senate corridor settlement. They were using what worked. What I found. She looked at Vael directly. The pattern the Conclave identified is real. Humans benefit from peaceful resolution. But what benefits humans also benefits everyone at the table. Show me one of those 8 resolutions where the non-human party got a worse outcome than they would have gotten at war. Show me one where the math says they lost. The quality of the silence in that room changed again. It went through the same process I had watched in the gray room with Keth, the breath-holding silence becoming something else, the tension reorganizing into something that was no longer pre-conflict but was not yet peace. You argue, Vael said very carefully, that the Conclave's assessment misjudges the nature of the advantage. I argue that mutual benefit isn't expansion, she said. I argue that getting good at finding common ground is not the same thing as conquest, and I argue that the thing the Conclave is actually worried about, which is a galaxy where one young species accumulates enough influence to destabilize everything else, is a lot less likely to happen if that species is spending its energy on negotiation than it is if you take away the negotiation and leave the species, which is still going to grow, still going to expand, and still going to have conflicts with its neighbors, but now without the tool that has been keeping those conflicts from turning into something a lot harder to stop. Vael's form shifted. Not dramatically, the way a fire shifts when the air in a room changes direction. Or you argue, it said even more carefully, that ending the pattern does not serve the continuance. I argue that the pattern is the continuance, she said. In this sector, right now, the Conclave wants balance. This is balance. It is uncomfortable, messy, imperfect balance that benefits humans slightly more than the statistical average, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but it is balance. And the alternative is not better balance. It is the question of who fills the space when you end it, and I would invite you to look at who is positioned to fill that space. I knew what she was referring to. I suspect Vael knew as well. The Dorraki sovereignty, with 43 warships and a still active weapons platform, had been in a cold peace with the colonial authority for 14 months. Keth was a reasonable being who had, in that grey room, shown himself capable of conversation. But Keth was also a warlord, with a military tradition 6 centuries deep, and the next warlord after Keth, his designated heir Subcommander Paxson, the one who had said something provocative about human territorial mapping and reached for his weapon, was not known for his patience or his curiosity. Remove human diplomatic influence from the sector. Remove the thing that had 14 months ago made a 3-year war into a conversation. Watch what happens next. Vael knew. Vael had 6,000 years of exactly this calculation, and whatever the Conclave had seen in the pattern of Lyra Voss, the counter-argument being made right now in the quiet of this conference room was sound, and Vael was old enough to know soundness when it stood in front of it. "You have prepared for this conversation," Vael said. "I have been preparing since I got on the shuttle 11 days ago," she said. "I knew you were coming. I knew why. I read everything we have." She paused. "There was a species 2,000 years ago called the Veth. One of your people helped them, without being sent, just because it was the right thing to do." Another shift in Vael's form. This one different from the others. Deeper, like something old moving beneath the surface of something even older. "You know of the Veth," Vael said. "I know the Arbiter who helped them was described as grief-stricken," she said quietly. "Was that you?" The silence was very long. My instruments were showing readings I had never seen before and could not interpret, which I noted down in detail because it was my job, and also because focusing on data collection was the only thing keeping me from having what I believe humans call a complete sensory overload in the observation room. "Yes," said Vael. "What happened to the Veth?" she asked. Another long pause. "They survived," Vael said. "They are well. They are a small species on a quiet world, and they are well. Because you helped them," she said. "Yes." "Without being sent," she said. "Yes. Because something in you, after everything you had seen, after thousands of years of watching species destroy themselves and each other, after all of it, something in you looked at the Veth and decided they should not end." She was not asking. She was saying it gently, the way you say something to someone that you can see they already know but have not said out loud in a very long time. Not because of the continuance, because of them. Because they were there and they were struggling and you could help, and so you did. The energy that constituted Vael's form did something I watched and could not fully describe and have been attempting to describe ever since. It contracted slightly and then expanded, and the light it produced shifted spectrum in a way that my instruments logged as thermal output change cause unidentified. I logged it as something else in my personal notes. I logged it as the specific pattern of light that living things produce when they are feeling something they did not expect to feel. "You are attempting to reach me," Vael said. Not as an accusation, with something closer to wonder. "I'm trying to talk to you," Lyra said. "That's all I ever do. I try to talk to whoever is in the room and find out who they actually are." "I am 6,000 years old," Vael said. "I have no homeworld. I have watched civilizations rise and collapse like weather patterns. I am not someone who can be reached by a single conversation." Keth said something similar. She said, "Not in those words, but the meaning was the same. He came to that summit in full armor, metaphorically speaking, and I don't think he had taken it off for 31 years. He didn't take it off for me either, but he uncrossed his arms, and we talked, and people stopped dying." She looked up at Vael. "You came here to end something. I'm asking you to consider that the more interesting thing, the harder thing, the thing worth doing, is not ending it but understanding it, and then maybe helping it." "Helping it," Vael repeated. "You have been the instrument of the Conclave for 6,000 years," she said. "Sent here, sent there. Go and assess. Go and act. I'm not asking you to betray your purpose. I'm asking whether your purpose is really what the Conclave says it is, or whether your purpose is something you have been doing longer than the Conclave has even existed, which is making sure that things that should not end, do not end." There it was, the thing she had been building since day 4. The shape she had found in the files and the accounts and the 2,000-year-old record of a grief-stricken being helping a small species survive. She had not gone looking for a weakness to exploit. She had gone looking for who Vael actually was, beneath the role and the power and the 6,000 years, and she had found something. Vael was quiet for what my instruments measured as 9 minutes. In the room it felt like the middle section of a very long word. The space between knowing what you are going to say and actually saying it. The Conclave will not be pleased, Vael said finally. Probably not, she agreed. I am their arbiter. You are, she said, but you were Vael before you were an arbiter. That is a very human way of thinking about identity, Vael said, and there was something in its voice that was not quite warmth and not quite amusement, but was definitely in the general direction of both. Probably, she said, we are a young species. We have had to think about identity a lot because we keep arguing about it. But thinking about it a lot means occasionally we land on something real. Another silence. Shorter. The colonial authorities' diplomatic influence in this sector, Vael said slowly, as though thinking out loud for possibly the first time in centuries, is currently the primary mechanism preventing 3 active flashpoints from igniting into full conflicts that would collectively involve 17 species, and at current population and military estimates, result in approximately 12 billion casualties within 5 years. Yes, Lyra said. Ending that influence does not serve the continuance, Vael said. No. The Conclave's assessment was based on a projected 400-year outcome that did not adequately weight the present state cost of the proposed resolution. That is what I said. Yes, in slightly different words, she said. The Conclave, Vael said, and its form shifted again, this time with a quality I could only describe as rueful, is very good at the long view. It is occasionally not as attentive to the near view as the situation requires. Everyone has blind spots, she said, even people who can see 6,000 years. I will return to the Conclave, Vael said. I will present a revised assessment. The room breathed again. I noticed I was breathing again. The security team, standing against the wall with their inert weapons and deeply complicated expressions, appeared to also be breathing again. What does that mean for the current situation? Lyra asked. It means, Vael said, that I will not act on the original directive. It means the Conclave will review. It means the review will take time, and during that time the status of Lyra Voss and the colonial authorities' diplomatic operations in this sector will be under observation. We are happy to be under observation, she said. You are aware, Vael said, that I will be watching very carefully, that the pattern you described, mutual benefit, balance without conquest, must remain what you say it is. If it changes, if the mathematics begin to resemble what the Conclave originally assessed, I will return. That seems fair, she said. You are remarkably calm for someone who has just negotiated with an arbiter of the Undying, Vael said. I have been remarkably calm in every room I have walked into, she said. It's mostly just that the other option is panicking, and I have never found panicking particularly useful. Val's form shifted one more time, and the reading my instruments produced that time I saved in a separate file and have looked at frequently since, because what my instruments registered was a full-spectrum energy signature that had no previous record in our databases. It was not aggression. It was not preparation for action. It had the profile of something I have seen in living biological beings across dozens of species. When you strip away the cultural overlay and the specific biological expression, the closest word I have for it is gladness. 6,000 years old. The instrument of a power that has ended civilizations. The last living element of a species that no longer has a homeworld. Moving through eternity with every moment it has ever lived still present somewhere in its perception. Vael, ancient and untouchable and profoundly, privately lonely in a way that no other being in the galaxy had the frame of reference to fully appreciate. And a human woman had walked into the room, said its name, asked about the Veth, and talked to it the way you talk to someone who matters. Lyra Voss, said Vael. Yes, she said. I will be watching you specifically, it said, not as a surveillance function, as an interest. I know the feeling, she said. I find you very interesting too. If you require assistance, Vael said, and paused, as though checking the validity of this offer against some internal rule set that was apparently deciding, slowly, that this was acceptable in future engagements, situations where your assessment is that catastrophic outcomes are likely and conventional diplomatic means are insufficient. You may contact the Conclave and ask for you specifically, she said. And ask for me specifically, Vael said. It left the way it had arrived, without transition. One moment Vael was present, its light filling the room with frequencies our eyes could half perceive and our instruments could only categorize as unknown. Then it was gone, and the room was ordinary again, and the silence was the silence of a place where something significant had just occurred and the walls were still processing it. Lyra sat back in her chair. She let out one slow breath. She picked up her coffee, looked into the thermos and appeared to register that it was empty. "Greth," she said. I was already walking through the door. "I saw," I said. "Did you get it all on record?" she asked. "Every second," I said. "Good," she said. She set the empty thermos down. "I'm going to need more coffee." "I will arrange coffee," I said. "Lyra, what you just did." "I talked to someone," she said. "You talked to an arbiter of the Undying," I said, "and you made it reconsider a directive from its conclave, and you did it in approximately 40 minutes, and in the process you appear to have made it your personal contact within a 6,000-year-old governing body of cosmic entities." "When you say it like that," she said, "it sounds like more than it was." "It was exactly as much as it sounds like," I said. She looked at me. Those amber eyes were tired. Genuinely, deeply tired, the way eyes get when the adrenaline has cleared and the body remembers that it has been running on 4 hours of sleep for 11 days and 2 encounters with world historical events in the span of 18 months. She looked like a person who needed a meal and a full night's sleep and perhaps several consecutive quiet days in a place where nobody needed anything from her. She also looked, underneath the tiredness, like someone who was already thinking about the next problem, who was already building the next shape. "The Dorraki Technical Committee meets in 3 weeks, she said, "the one about the orbital stations near the Seni corridor. Paxine is heading their delegation." "Yes," I said. "Paxine," she said, "is going to be a project." "He reached for his weapon during the last session," I reminded her. "He did," she said, "but he also stopped when I spoke to him in his own dialect. He stopped because it surprised him, which means he's capable of being surprised, which means he's capable of updating. He just needs the right context." She picked up the empty thermos and the cracked datapad, the same cracked datapad she had never gotten a new one, and stood up. "I need his file, his family history, his military record, his actual history, not just the titles and the engagements, what his people value, what he's afraid of losing." "I will pull it," I said. "Thank you," she said. She paused at the door. "Greth, yes. Do you think Vael will actually talk to the Conclave?" I thought about this carefully. I thought about 9 minutes of silence and the energy signature my instruments had produced at the end, the one I had categorized as gladness. I thought about a being who had been helping when told to assess, and assessing when told to end, for 6,000 years, who had one day gone to a small species on the edge of extinction because something in it simply decided they should not end, and who had not told anyone about it until a junior cultural liaison with an empty coffee thermos asked the right question. "Yes," I said. "I think Vael will talk to the Conclave." "Good," she said. "That should be interesting for them." She walked out. I stayed in the doorway for a moment, looking at the conference table where an empty chair sat next to a thermos and a datapad and the faint residual warmth in the air that might have been left over from an energy field 6,000 years old. Then I pulled up Paxton's file, flagged it to Lyra's datapad, and made a note at the bottom of my day's report. It was shorter than most of my notes. Sometimes the most important things do not require many words. I wrote, "She is doing it again." The war the Conclave had intended to prevent would not come from Lyra Voss. It would come from the vacuum that would have been left if Vael had acted on its directive, and it was now, provisionally, not coming at all. 3 flashpoints remained active. 17 species remained in varying states of tension. Paxton was going to be a project, but Lyra Voss had an empty thermos and a cracked datapad, and now the personal contact information of an arbiter who had been watching the galaxy for 6,000 years and had apparently decided that watching Lyra Voss was worth doing specifically. And somewhere in the sector, 11 civilizations that did not know how close they had come to something catastrophic were going about their days, conducting their commerce and their arguments and their ordinary small frictions with each other, entirely unaware that a junior liaison with no weapons and deeply questionable coffee had just stood in a room with something ancient and extraordinary and said, as she had said to every powerful being she had ever stood in a room with, "I see you. I know who you are. Can we talk?" They could always talk. That was the thing. That was the thing I had written in my first report after the Grey Room on Station Merith, and the thing I had seen confirmed in every engagement since, and the thing I now believed with the conviction of a Vokhari observer who has spent 114 years watching the galaxy be difficult about everything. Anyone can be talked to. Even something that has been watching the universe for 6,000 years and forgotten what it is like to be surprised. Especially that, Director Sulo's note, appended to Observer Greth's official account, filed 6 months after the events described. The Conclave of the Undying has, per its own communication received 4 months ago, formally revised its assessment of human diplomatic operations in the Velith Arm sector. The Colonial Authority has been notified that the original directive has been suspended indefinitely pending ongoing review. 3 of the 11 flashpoints identified in Greth's report have been successfully de-escalated. Subcommander Paxin participated in productive technical committee discussions regarding the Sen Corridor orbital stations. The stations are scheduled for voluntary relocation over the next 18 months. Paxin apparently asked Lyra Voss where she learned her Dorraki military dialect. She told him she had an audio course and a lot of time on long transit flights. He called her a strange creature in Dorraki, and she told him in Dorraki that she had been called stranger things, and he laughed and the committee continued. Lyra Voss has been reclassified as a Level 7 diplomatic asset, the first in Colonial Authority history. She has requested that this classification not change her day-to-day assignments, her reporting structure, or the size of her travel bag allowance. The Colonial Authority is considering her request. Greth has filed for extended contract renewal as senior observer. He notes in his application that he has found recent events professionally stimulating. Somewhere, a sanctum the size of a moon moves through space at velocities we cannot measure, and an ancient being that has watched the galaxy for 6,000 years watches it still. Whether it watches with more interest than before, we cannot say for certain. We have a theory.